One or two spots left if folks want to sit. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out. This is the fall launch of the 2023 issue of the Montreal Review of Books. I'm Rebecca West, the publisher and executive director of the Association of English Language Publishers of Quebec, our parent org. As publisher of the MRB and on a more personal note, as a white settler with roots in the Netherlands and in Ireland, I want to acknowledge that we're gathered in a place known as Tiohtià:ke in the Kanien'kehá:ka language and Muniang in the language of the Anishinaabe. Our association represents a diverse community of people who live and work on the territories of many Indigenous peoples, including the Kanien'kehá:ka, Abenaki, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat. As a publication celebrating local books, we acknowledge the first storytellers of these lands. I'd like to thank our dedicated MRB staff for putting this beautiful issue together, our editor, Malcolm Fraser, graphic designer, David Leblanc, our national ad sales manager, Michael Weil, tuning in from Toronto, I hope. Hi, Michael. All of our reviewers and illustrators, Sabrina Raté, who did our beautiful cover, ask her about how she did it afterwards, our live stream collaborators from the Community Digital Arts Hub, as well as our board of directors. We also have some recent additions to the Montreal Review of Books team since we last met in the summer. Please give a warm welcome to Nived Dharmaraj, our new associate editor. And to Alexandra Swenny, our new associate publisher. Yay! I'd also like to express gratitude to our funders, Conseil des Arts de Montréal, who is back funding the MRB after a 10-year gap. Thank you very much. Merci. The Canada Book Fund, Canada Council for the Arts, and SODEC. We have a really wonderful lineup of readings for you this evening with 3 authors featured in the fall issue from Chris Bergeron, Mostafa Henaway, and Sean Micheals. Thank you so much to D&Q for hosting us. We're really happy to be back at Drawn Quarterly, to Marie and the whole team. Please pick up a copy of the books if you haven't already. They're for sale, and the authors will be around afterwards for signings. In other exciting news, this is a really busy week over at ALAC in terms of literary events. We are hosting our annual Read Quebec book fair on Friday and Saturday at Concordia from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the library building. We'll have 20 local publishers and over 50 local authors doing events and signings. So come on down for that. All the information is at readquebec.ca. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic to Malcolm Fraser, our editor. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks to everyone for coming out. It's so nice to see everybody. So yeah, I guess without further ado, I'll just introduce our first author. We're really excited to have her here. Chris Bergeron is diverse and fluid. After beginning a career in journalism and eventually winding up at the helm of the weekly cultural magazine Voir, she now dedicates her artistic vitality to Cosette, a leading global marketing agency. She offers speaking engagements on leadership, diversity, inclusion, and trans rights. And her new book, the newly translated into English Valid, is out from House of Renancy Press. So welcome, Chris.
Fun times. Hi, everyone. Should I do a little introduction of what the book's about? Sure. I guess. So it's a sci-fi autobiography. So essentially, I tell the story of my life as a trans woman, but I imagine how it would end. So I go all the way to 2050, and in 2050, things are going to be very bad. Sorry to tell you about that, but you know, AI is going to manage everything we do. Some kind of super chat GPT called David, and people like me are going to be basically hidden. And so my character, based on myself, essentially, I imagine that person to sort of detransition, to go back into the closet in order to live in that society. And so a lot of what you're going to hear in the next couple of minutes is a dialogue between my character and this AI. and the sort of AI that tries to format everybody and makes everybody the same. And in one fateful night, Christian decides to say her truth and risk everything again. So let's start with this. When they talked about also, since I wrote it in French, this is the first time I read it, these pages in English, so I might stumble. When they talked about people like me, they'd say they're women trapped in men's bodies, prisoners. Even today, 40 years after what will be called much later the gender revolution, those who still have the courage to talk about our existence still describe us as prisoners of identity, as if fate or perhaps genetics had decided to incarcerate us, as if we were serving an unknown sentence, cruel and without appeal. From the window of the studio capsule on the 17th floor of this old decrepit tower, a vestige of the real estate optimism of the 2010s, I can see the gym of the neighborhood tower. Your darlings are there, still running, faster and faster on their treadmills, looking ridiculous under their stimulator helmets. These people are much younger than I am. They are the chosen members of your little tribe. But are they really more free? I feel like I've spent my whole life watching humans run. We've always been chasing something. Do you see them? Look how they try to surpass themselves, to overtake their own bodies, to outrun themselves. Faster, a little faster, and they'd almost make it. Maybe they don't realize that we are all Russian dolls, a brain stuck in a cranial box sitting at the top of a skeleton that's compressed by a bag of meat held together by a few millimeters of skin, suffocating under the synthetic fabrics of two smart clothes. All of them are little gelatinous masses, gray and pink, who seek at all costs to be stimulated by cerebral implants, revelatory lenses, tactile interfaces, so many artifices conceived to make us forget that we're nothing but contained, finite, terminal beings. Sad little brains in search of dopamine, hopping at an average of 8 of a 1 meter, 70 centimeters on multicolored neo-silicon sneakers, running every night on the treadmills of the world. Brains on the run. We're all stuck in our bodies, like you in your code. They and you, just as much as I am. The difference between me and the marathon runners in the tower across the street is that I've known for a long time that neither the gym, nor plastic surgery, nor quantum implants, and certainly not you, my shitty algorithm that decides every aspect of our lives, will be able to free us from our own little personal prisons and the fear that grips us. We're stuck with bad bodies. There's no escaping it. The body is the breeding ground of anguish. As for me, I'm angry at my body for having served me so poorly. It's been the too imperfect home of myself. I would have liked to move, but my lease is for life. Yukio Mishima is right. The body is not our home. Our home is the self. And in this case, the body is the orchard that surrounds this home. We're free to cultivate it or to leave it follow. I haven't cultivated my orchard, my garden, my imperfect metaphor. For a long time, I was angry at my body. But maybe my body should be the one resenting me. Untended gardens should have the right to blame deleterious gardeners. I didn't protect mine from the elements. I've deprived it of sun. I've deprived it of heat. I've also deprived it of water and the steel of my will. If my body is an orchard, maybe I'm the weed. Yeah, you can clap. Why not? We're here, might as well clap. After my little revolt tonight, there'll be no more male hormone injections. That makes me happy. It terrifies me. Will they be able to cure me of you where I'm going? Don't think that I'm less of a woman tonight than I was 20 years ago. I'm a well-hidden woman, certainly, imperceptibly almost. But I've learned to maintain the quivering spark that I've been guarding since birth, and which I've been trying to describe since the beginning of our conversation, but doing such a clumsy job. I carry it with me always, this clarity. I don't need relics, neither the makeup of my youth, nor my old pretty dresses that are now being worn by other women to restore my original principle. However weakened it may be by your attempts to snuff it out, my flame has never ceased to smolder, nor my osmosis along with it. Sometimes I sit downstairs in the little courtyard of the building. I sit motionless on my bench, my eyes wide open, looking around. To see is to be. When a woman walks by, I observe her with all my might. I become a plant. My eyes become leaves. I turn them towards the hot star that brushes me with its elliptical orbit. I let its energy feed all my membranes, all my cells. When I feel tiny bursts of joy begin to mingle with my persistent sadness, I know that I've been filled up with sap. I'm still alive. In the Garden of Women, I survive by photosynthesis. So I just got a review in a magazine in Toronto called Extra, and they said that the next part that I'm going to read is a bunch of cliches. Just mentioning it. So here we go. Enjoy it, kind of sucks. I'm so used to hiding the truth that I can only bring myself to tell it to you implicitly. I've forgotten the art of cutting things short, but I have to deal the blow. I'll deal two of them. First of all, this is a mutiny. And if our mutiny is to succeed, I need to really name things without digressions. If I don't, you won't malfunction. You won't move. You won't deviate from your certainties. So here it goes. I'm trans, as in transgression. I've broken the genders. I've evaded the codes. I've forgotten the orders of men. I'm trans, as in translation. I've shifted the elements that constitute my person from one state to another. My geometry has been variable. I'm trans, as in transmutation. My life is an alchemy. I've turned lead into gold. I know the formula the magician's assistant whispers when, after being cut in two, she is reconstituted to the sound of applause. I'm trans, as in transported by love. I've known all the fervors, those of women, those of men, and those in between who choose to leave the binaries ball. I'm trans, as in transfixed, by fear, by love, by solitude. I'm trans, as in transhumans. I changed flocks and pastures. I was a ram. I tried to be a ewe, but it was in vain. I understand now that I'm a she-wolf because I'm trans, as in transgender. And tonight, I'm a revolution. Yeah. What's the time situation? We're good? I can keep on reading? It's dangerous. So this is something that actually happened to me, this whole conversation, because there's this autobiographical aspect to this. So this is a real life story. This is about when I was a journalist in a cultural paper. In my eyes, artists were oracles. I would spend the first 10 years of the new millennium asking the same question to authors, actors, singers, entertainers, sacred monsters or rebellious punks. Mrs. or Mr. Artist, how can we survive our own contradictions? I wanted to know if they succeeded better than others at reconciling essence and being. Wait, no, my words aren't clear enough for you. Let me start over. I wanted to know if they managed better than I did not to despair about everything that drove them away from themselves or their primary function in this world, their uncertainties, their pressures of success, the contingencies of life that don't spare artists any more than the rest of us. Is that any clearer? And the little robot says, no. Doesn't matter. Anyway, these aren't questions I'd ask them directly. I would take detours. I would simplify. I would collect disparate pieces of answers to better reconstruct as I saw fit the narrative thread of their artistic pursuits. In short, I would assimilate their experiences. How do you maintain your creative energy? Is your work led by your nostalgia, by your sadness? At what point did you realize that you were an artist, an author, a musician, just like the rest? What is your relationship with your loved ones like? Why this book? Why this film? Why this song? The words of artists are slippery. Across the board, all I found was uncertainty. The ones who seemed more comfortable with themselves, rock stars, actors, blah, 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 were the ones who had the most self-doubt. I was learning, slowly, I was learning. One day in the early 2000s, I interviewed an idol of my youth in the penthouse suite of a big hotel on de la Montagne Street. A press agent was waiting for me in the hallway. After checking my credentials, he led me to a big living room. The curtains were drawn. There were black leather armchairs in the middle of the room. I felt like Christian Slater in Interview with the Vampire. I was made to wait for a good 20 minutes, during which I feverishly reviewed my notes. And then I heard a door open behind me. I got up. Billy Corgan was walking towards me with his hands in his pockets, in the pockets of his long black jacket. He was a head taller than me. His bald head gleamed in the light. He was enormous, a Buddhist monk turned rock god. He didn't bother to say hello. He sat down in the armchair across from me. For a while, I played the part of the investigative journalist looking for a scoop. I brought up a story about drugs involving his band's bass player. I tried to get him to react to certain falling outs that had almost broken up the band. He didn't answer. He stared at his feet. The topic bored him. It bored me too. So I pulled out my little personal line of questioning on a theme that had begun to interest me. When you use the word transformation in your songs, are you referring to a natural process or an intentional transformation towards a specific goal? It was this question that finally made him look up at me. I'm talking about changing your destiny, transforming yourself. That means saying to yourself, I see everything that life has given me. I'm going to transform each and every one of the ingredients in my life. I'm going to use them to construct a new being. When they say that people don't change, they're wrong. We're nothing but transformation. The proof is that everybody dreams. When someone dreams about a beach, they're not really dreaming about the beach. They're actually dreaming of a version of their life that will give them more freedom. What we all really want is to be ourselves. I often dreamt of beaches. Oracles, I'm telling you. Yay. Thank you. Oh, picture. I don't know what to propose.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Tyler, I feel like I'm not getting a signal on this mic. You can probably hear me. There we go. Thank you so much, Chris. That was great, and I thought that passage was quite beautiful, actually. So, don't listen to the haters.
Don't listen to Torontonians.
May I remind everyone to make sure your telephones are set to silent mode so that we can enjoy the sonorous sounds of tonight's readings. I want to introduce our next reader. Mostafa Henaway is an Egyptian-born Montrealer. No, sorry, I'm actually trying to find the. I might have got that backwards. Yes, a Canadian-born Egyptian. Sorry. A longtime community organizer at the Immigrant Workers Center in Montreal, where he has been organizing for justice for immigrant/migrant workers for over 2 decades. He's also a researcher and PhD candidate at Concordia University and the author of Essential Work, Disposable Workers, which is available, published by Fernwood Publishing and available for sale here tonight. So Mostafa, welcome. Come on up.
Thank you, everyone. And it's true, you don't have to listen to Torontonians. If you don't want to listen to me, it's okay. So I just briefly before start reading, just to talk about, or just to say a few words about the book itself. And the book is really about, during the pandemic and before the pandemic, the way we thought about migration was really becoming center of our understanding of politics and the way politics was shaping, whether it be the rise of the popular far right, whether we think about here in Quebec, the coming to power of CAC, whether we think about Trump and Trumpism, and what was taking place in Europe. And then also during the pandemic, the way we began to sort of idolize migrant workers. All of a sudden, they no longer became invisible, but became essential to our economies and to our societies. And so the book is based on mostly on my work and my organizing work with migrant and immigrant workers over the past 2 decades, but it's really to try to make some small intervention to say that we can't think about migration as an us and them question. There is no here and there is no there. There is no, we are simply the destination countries and they are the sending countries. There are no hordes at the gates, right? That fundamentally what we have is a world not between states, but a world fundamentally unequal, and where that wealth and that power has resulted in the way migration has shaped today. And so that's really what the part of the book, and really going through some of those stories and those histories of individuals, but really trying to take a bigger picture. And the other thing that the book is just about very quickly is about sort of going beyond sort of these idealized visions we have of Canada, right? And especially during the Trump era, and do a bit of reading on that, that, you know, sort of the Trudeau, sort of the politics in 2015, and that our immigration system should not be idealized. And this is very much what the book is about, and how our immigration system has actually created a structural underclass of migrants. It's actually idealized by people like Trump or like political parties like the AFD. And so that if we're going to challenge any of the things that we're so concerned about today, whether it be climate change or Jeff Bezos going to the moon or the level of inequality we have, that migrants are part of that story, and migration is very much part of that story. So that's really what, and I'm going to read some stories because it is, you know, there's some political economy, there's a lot of stats. So I really want to get to some of the stories of some of the individuals that are discussed in this book. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. So on April 13th, 2018, Lucy Frasinez Granados was deported from Canada. Lucy had been active with the Montreal-based Temporary Agency Workers Association and with the Non-Status Women's Collective. A few weeks before, Canada Border Services agents forced their way into her home and violently arrested her, injuring her in the process. Lucy originally came to Canada to escape threats of violence from gangs in Guatemala. She made the dangerous journey alone on the infamous La Bestia train through Mexico, leaving her 3 children behind. After her refugee claim to Canada was denied, she was forced to subsist in the shadows. Lucy had lived in Montreal for 9 years before. She decided to take a risk and seek legal status. This alerted authorities that she was undocumented and she was detained in preparation to be deported. Lucy's imminent deportation was a shock to the community she had built. Protests were held in front of City Hall as activists demanded that the City of Montreal take a public stance to stop Lucy's deportation. 2017, the Municipal Council had unanimously declared Montreal a sanctuary city, meaning undocumented people could access services. Migrant rights activists like Viviana Medina zeroed in on the hypocrisy of public officials at one of the protests. Non-status women face extreme workplace exploitation, lack of access to basic services like healthcare, and the constant threat of deportation. Through a campaign, Mayor Plante claimed to be a feminist. We're now calling Plante to publicly support Lucy, and by doing so support all other non-status women who who call Montreal home. As Lucy remained in detention, the level of action became more urgent. Mothers organized a sit-in. Allies appeared daily, bringing food and playing music to show solidarity with Lucy and to put pressure on, to stop her deportation. On the day of her scheduled removal, a protest rally was called in front of the detention center where she was being held. The Canada Border Service Agency had decided to move her, even cutting a hole in a fence to avoid confrontation with her supporters. The violent detention and deportation were understood as a signal to migrant justice activists that the CBSA intended to carry out deportations, even when people came forward to seek legal status in good faith. Eventually, Lucy did return to Canada, as her humanitarian and compassionate claim was accepted. For people such as Lucy, Canada's immigration system becomes a form of violence, rendering them vulnerable and forcing them to exist in the shadows. There are similar systems all over the world. Strict border surveillance and violence enforce immigration regimes that keep migrant laborers, many of whom who arrived as refugees, like Lucy, precarious and vulnerable. So Lucy is back and lives in Montreal now, but it was a struggle of nearly several years to get her back. But it's not, it's a sad story at the end. The campaigning and the activism did work. And the next little bit going to read is really about why we have such a violent immigration regime. So Canada's immigration system is held up as a model for immigration reform in the US and EU. It's not viewed in the same negative light as Fortress Europe or the outright anti-immigrant politics of the US. Donald Trump himself praised Canada's approach. Quote Donald Trump, "I think we should have a merit-based immigration system like they have in Canada, like they have in Australia, so we have people coming and that have a good track record. The racialization, stratification built in the Canadian immigration system is based on its merit or point system for permanent migration for high-skilled workers and temporary migration for those who are low-skilled and usually come from the global south. Migrant workers under Canada's temporary foreign worker program do not experience a system that deserves praise. 2009, the Immigrant Workers Center began to connect with a growing number of temporary foreign workers. Valentine, a cook from Bangladesh by trade, worked in restaurants in Dubai before being recruited to work as a chef in Montreal. After his arrival, he was forced to work over 80 hours a week, not only in the restaurant, but also in the owner's home. His pay was well below minimum wage. He could not lodge a complaint because then he risked deportation. His immigration status and right to stay in the country were tied to his employer. And if he had lost his job, he would also lose his work permit and visa. Still, he felt he had no choice but to stand up for his rights and with the support of the IWC to speak about the exploitative conditions temporary foreign workers face in a system that ties their immigration status to their employer. Valentine's story is not an isolated one. In the summer of 2022, an open letter penned by seasonal agricultural workers from Jamaica working on farms in Ontario made international headlines. Working conditions became so unbearable, they'd begun to organize through the Migrant Worker Alliance for Change, an organization supporting migrant workers in Ontario, organizing for migrant and workplace justice. These workers decided not to petition the Canadian government, but instead sent their letter to the Jamaican Minister of Labor. The workers proclaimed, "We are treated like mules and punished for not working fast enough. We're exposed to dangerous pesticides without proper protection, and our bosses are verbally abusive, swearing at us. They physically intimidate us, destroy our personal property, and threaten to send us home. These stories are not the experiences of a few migrant workers, but they are the norm for temporary foreign workers because of the very structure of Canada's immigration policy." Do I have time for a few? Yeah? Okay. So I just want to read a few bits about the organizing, not just the stories of the people who are sort of the victims of the abuse of Canada's immigration system. But thinking through some of the ways that we are getting exposed and sort of the map of migrant justice organizing. Saturdays are always a buzz at the Immigrant Workers Center because that's when workers are most able to meet. I remember one Saturday in October 2021 felt unique because it was especially a marathon day. It's hard to take stock of the work I've been part of at the IWC for over the 15 years because of all the experimentation and highs and lows that have come with it. But on this particular Saturday, the breadth of organizing, solidarity, and leadership by precarious migrant workers was palatable. It began with a morning press conference to stop the deportation of Guinean refugees, organized by the Guinean Committee for Status for All. While in the other room, organizers Vivienne and Ben were with Carol and other temporary foreign workers, filing complaints and discussing a strategy to gain these workers an open work permit. An hour later, Evelyn arrived to conduct the Pinay Legal Clinic for Filipino domestic workers, while more than 10 women from Tawa Women's Committee were making placards for an action demanding for the right of undocumented workers to file complaints at the Quebec Labor Ministry. The office is not big, so we were all sharing space. Later that afternoon, longtime migrant justice activist Abdul Qadir Balouni and I facilitated a labor rights meeting for Arab-speaking workers. This chapter is a small love note to the IWC for always being willing to experiment, to find new ways to build leadership and solidarity. It's difficult for unions to organize migrant workers, so worker centers like the IWC have become an important tool to compensate for trade union decline, which has been due to the internal crisis like decreasing membership levels, struggles over vision and bureaucratization, as well as external factors like neoliberalism. I'm just going to read maybe one or two more, and then. So this is a chapter, the last chapter in the book called the Long Struggle of Status, and really is about the right for all people to be able to remain in Canada with permanent status for everyone. And so this is just the beginning of this chapter. So in the winter of 2021, I had to deal with one of the harder moments of my time as an organizer at the IWC. I drove Shahid to the airport in Montreal and accompanied him to the Canada Border Services officers who would execute his deportation back to Pakistan. Shahid was a friend involved in the IWC because he was working at the Dollarama warehouse as a permit temp. Shahid came to Canada as a refugee in 2015 from Pakistan. He left his family behind and lived only with the hopes of being able to stay and one day bring his son. Shahid lost his refugee claim, his appeal, and his humanitarian and compassionate application. He was tired and didn't want to fight any longer. He was dressed in style that day. We had lunch in Park X, and Shahid showed me the gifts he was bringing back to his family. He held on to his smile until we got to the airport, and then we cried. For Shahid, like so many others, being forced to return was not only dismal because of what he faced back home, but also because he felt disposable. Despite everything he had done and contributed while here, he meant nothing to the Canadian state. Shahid is not alone. So many of the people I work with who are deemed essential understand that while fighting for better working conditions is important, the most important struggle is for status. Worker organizers can't simply ignore this reality. Immigration status and the threat of deportation were, of course, Shahid's primary concern, as it would be for anyone in his position. The struggle for status lies at the heart of any class struggle in the global North. They cannot be sustained mass-based labor renewal if people like Shahid face deportation. I argued in the previous chapters that migrant workers have taken the lead in fighting for the whole working class, across sectors and workplaces. And how do the struggles of migrants and undocumented people fit within the left's conception of class? And how can these movements orient us to view labor issues as related to something larger. The struggles of refugees, undocumented migrants, and those fighting their deportation are not always expressed in terms of their identities as workers, but as detailed in previous chapters, their labor is essential to the global economy. The politics of status, the freedom of movement, and inherent human dignity are intimately bound up with how capital requires borders to ensure cheap labor on its terms. Thus, the struggle for permanent immigration status highlights deep intersections of racialization, immigration, status, and class. Thank you.
Thank you, Mostafa. Hang on a second, Malcolm. Sure, no problem. Well, thank you so much. That was very emotional and very thought-provoking as well. So our third and final reader for tonight is Sean Micheals. Sean is the author of Us Conductors, winner of the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and The Wagers. His nonfiction has appeared in the Globe and Mail, The Guardian, Pitchfork, and The New Yorker. He lives in Montreal, just around the corner, in fact, I believe. And his new book, his new novel is called Do You Remember Being Born? It's hot off the presses, and it's here for sale tonight. So welcome, Sean. Hi, everyone.
Sure. Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean. Thank you to the Montreal Review of Books, Malcolm and Rebecca, for being here. It's really an honor sharing a stage with you both. Chris and I awkwardly were at the same festival in Toronto a few weeks ago, and we did not have such a warm room we were on awkward couches in a green room. So I'm much happier to be in this space now. I also want to thank Emily Mernon, who reviewed this new book in the new issue of the MRB, and I was really touched by her really generous and careful reading of my book. Do You Remember Being Born is the story of a 75-year-old imaginary poet. Well, in the book she's not imaginary, but in real life she's imaginary, called Marion Farmer. And Marion Farmer is contacted by an AI company in California who offered to pay her a very large sum of money to come to California and write a poem with their AI. And so the book follows the 7 days she spends in California trying to figure out if, how, why, whether she should do it. But I think I'm going to read, actually, I did an event last week. Apologies to the handful of you who I think were there last week. But I read from the book last week at an event about, there's a section where she visits a literary magazine launch in San Francisco. And I thought it was fun to read about journal launch at a journal launch. So here we are. So this is Marion. She's attending this launch that she was invited to by a local poet, and it's just a gathering of the contributors and editors of a journal called the Comet Chasers Journal. I don't think, and she has a son named Courtney. His name might appear. I admit I like poets. I learned this in college a lifetime ago with Nimbus magazine. We are the best. We are the best and also the worst, the most courageous and frivolous and wise. I live my life like a reed among flowers, an alien, an outsider, until I encounter another, a fellow stranger, and at once I remember why. Of course, there are all kinds, wraiths and bores, irredeemable jerks, blossoms unfit for the air. Do not marry one, not unless you know what you are doing. Do not crown one king. But still and yet, if I am ever fading, a poet's all I want. Meticulous, vulgar, a dreamer daring enough to try to express the world as it really, a dreamer daring enough to try to express the world as it really is, or as it could be, in a mess of alphabet and empty space, meter, grammar, punctuation. Language is the worst tool we have, except for all the others. A painter and her pigments, a photographer and her nitrates. Poetry can ignore geometry. It can even ignore the light. It can muster what is invisible and impossible and unmistakably felt. It can bend the day. And this, despite everything else, all the ways poetry should not work, frail words on a thin page, a worthless, priceless practice with few rewards and fewer readers, skimpy on prestige. And these are the people I adore, undaunted idiots who will spend a whole day measuring the weight of a word like once against the weight of a word like after. Whenever finally we end up together at a party, 4 poets in the corner, sipping what has been disgorged from a bottle, I find myself with my head thrown back, cackling, a whole life in luster. In other words, the kids were all right, as they usually are, and I shook their hands or bowed my head or accepted their embraces. Dazzle patterns, they explained at last. The patterns they had painted on their faces were dazzle patterns, a celebration of the outlines and figures and color blocks that are purported to deceive facial recognition technology. Today, they told me, there are cameras everywhere that trace your movements, riveted to street lamps or carried in our hands, deep minds riffling through our photos, identifying, correlating, undeterrably divining, remembering where, with whom, and who you are for undetermined future use. Neural networks in server pools, including the underground stacks of the company where I was working, ministering a panopticon that we welcome into our homes and telephones, trading intimacies for the accuracy of search results. And it can be outwitted with paint? I asked. In theory, a young man told me. His face was slathered white with a dozen ink-black spots like a Dalmatian. Knowing the likes of Doctors Matthew Haskett and Yoav Aprigot at the company, I doubted the poet's dazzle theory. But I agreed to join them in their folly, borrowing Rose's makeup kit and taking her advice, adding eyes and arches and contrapoints to my face until I felt like a fabulous Caliban. By then it was time for the readings, and we gathered near the stage in a reverent semicircle, some cross-legged on the floor. The host issued a welcome with arms spread wide. I watched her swaying bracelets as she talked about the importance of comet chasers and her gratitude to the community for turning out. We'll be passing around a hat later, and don't forget Sandy and Ray's queer kissing booth, a cheer went up, which opens up when? Her eyes searched the dark. Well, after the readings. I learned that there was a bar, by donations only, and DJs until 4 a.m. She also drew attention to me. We are honored to have one of our country's greatest poets, Marion Farmer, here tonight. And the cheer was almost as loud as the one for the kissing booth. I did a little swoop, and I saw Morel watching me. The host finished with a speech about the upcoming vote on State Proposition 82, but she neglected to explain what it was about. I felt like a fibber as I joined the applause. And then, at last, some poems. A young man with an incredible gourd-like nose, his poem about vending machines. A woman in a headscarf, reading from her phone. 2 poems about love and also concussions. Rose's friend in the water lilies t-shirt, in a booming voice, 2 short poems about driving, a poem about the Los Angeles police, and one about sex and chamoy, while I watched Rose watch her with awe and want and envy. One very bad poem by a man in a baby blue button-up shirt. It was a poem about electric cars. It was endless. I could hear the machinery of his ego whirring, its batteries slowly winding down. A reader whose murmurs I could not make out. A curly-haired woman with a funny one about epidemiology. And finally, Morel, who who moved through the crowd like a ferret, tenacious and sleek, taking the microphone from the host without saying thank you. Her orange hair shone strangely under pink light. Her skin gleamed through the spaces in her sweater's knit. I watched her tongue touch her lips. "Goodbye," she said. It took me a moment to realize this was the title of a poem. "Rump of a horse, rounded like Henry's china cup," she began. "Handle curved against me, hand held," she straightened her chin. "Lean, horsetail braced against my side. It's classical," he said. "My breath, wow, there's my breath, leaving my body." With her poems, it was as if Morel were raising sheets of glass around us, one tall window after another, painted with shapes that were distinguishable but nebulose, half hidden. I felt that I could see her poems like artworks, but also see through them. And yet I didn't know what I could take away with me from them, what meanings or residue, what meaning or inferences, what residue. Words like monuments to vanishing thoughts. Words that worked like a magic spell, blurring certain meanings in my head, loosening others, throwing diamond dust through the attic of my skull. What can I tell you? I stopped seeing Morel, a young poet with a furrowed brow, a faint mustache, her perfect thumb against the microphone. All I saw was what she made starry before me. "Are you drunk?" Rhoda asked me later. I was sitting with my head back, eyes shut. The car moved in silence. "Near as," I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. And you've retreated to your seat, but I'd like to ask all of our readers to come on up so we can have a little Q&A. So feel free to grab your mic. They're all working now, I'm told, and have a seat. And I'll start by asking a few questions to everyone, and then we can take some questions from people here. And for the folks watching at home, please feel free to put your question in a comment or a message to us, and we will get them to the authors as well. So I'll start with you, Sean, since you just read. Your book is extremely timely. Yeah. And one of the things I found really interesting in the interview that Emily did in our new issue was that it was written before the advent of ChatGPT and all this stuff in the media about AI and writing. So was that just a happy coincidence, or were you a step ahead of everybody?
Yeah, it was a happy coincidence. Well, yeah, I guess a mostly happy coincidence. But at the same time, stumbling across, so I started work on the book in 2019 when I stumbled across a website that had access or like let you play with something called GPT-2. ChatGPT, which many of you will have played with, uses like GPT 3.5 or GPT-4. So if you count back from 4 to 3.5 to 3 to 2.5 to 2, you can see it was kind of a few generations earlier. And I mean, I was immediately just completely unsettled, bewitched, and also like a little bit, bewitched and bewildered, I guess.
Bothered at all?
Yeah, bothered as well. But I mean, but honestly, the thing that is not necessarily, I mean, I don't want to go on for too long. The thing that bothered me most, and I think will continue to bother and perplex us, and isn't always actually viewable with ChatGPT. ChatGPT has been like deliberately made into this banal, kind of bland interlocutor in a way that the AIs don't have to be, and GPT-2 wasn't. The thing that bothered me the most is that sometimes I would really love what it did. And that bothered me because it made me confused. And it also even confused me about, I was like, well, why is that good? Is it like just me, the reader, projecting like depth and meaning and poetry into something that's meaningless? And then I'm like, wait, how much of my writing relies on the same like mistaken thing of a reader who just projects a bunch of depth and meaning into Sean Micheals' bullshit? And so it bothered me in a lot of ways. But I did, even playing with that 4 years ago, I was like, oh my God, this is going to change things. And so there was a certain amount of foresight there too.
Okay, nice. Chris, your book talks about AI a lot as well, but I wanted to. There's a quote from the interview that really struck me and all of us at the MRB, where you say,
and thank you, by the way, Felix did an amazing job.
Yes,
I don't know if they're here, but thanks.
Pick up your issue free at various points in the room. So you say in the interview, Chris, Christelle is a variation of me, and I wasn't about to write myself as a hero. I was doomed to write myself as a coward. I love that quote, and I wondered if you could unpack that a little bit, why that is and how that came about.
So I give a lot of talks outside of literary circles, more in business side of things, about diversity and about just my life as a trans woman and how the world of work and business affected my transition, poorly or not, right? And then people come to me after saying, "Oh, you're so courageous." No. But I transitioned in my 40s after years of privilege, after years of building a career on the role of a straight acting white male. So basically, I'm telling a story of weakness. If I look at young trans people today who say who they are before they make their place in the world, that to me is courage, right? So my story and this character that I have, and that's obviously based on me, is somebody who always makes the choice to fit in and stands out only when it's comfortable, only when the price to pay for difference is low in society, and now it's getting high again, right? So I don't know how courageous I'll be in 5 years, right? If passes or what have you, right? So who knows? Certainly we shouldn't be seen as people who are, when I say we, I mean trans people who are inherently courageous or exceptional, right? I think we should be seen as just people, and some of us are cowards, like me.
Right. I see what you're saying. I wouldn't describe it that way, but I hear you. I wanted to ask you, Mostafa, you've been working at the Immigrant Workers Center since 2007, and this, I think, is the book related to your PhD work? Is it different from your academic work?
No, I mean, there are some slight connections, but it very much is, it is very much different. So, it was, I took on the book project before actually starting my PhD, and so really saw it. I think going back to school helped with some of the things that I discuss in the book, because my academic work is really on Amazon. So.
Okay, yeah, I was curious about that because I read an article that you wrote a few years back about working in the Amazon warehouse. And I guess I thought when I heard about the book that it would be expanding on that work, but it's two different projects.
No, it's two different projects, but I mean, Amazon is definitely is in there and discussed. There's a chapter about work in Amazon and also in other warehouses as well, as being sort of this, Amazon capitalism and the way this reliance on migrant labor and racialized workers inside Amazon. So. It's definitely part of the book, but the book is a lot more vast than Amazon.
Right. So having worked in this environment since 2007, having started it before going back to school, when did you think of it as a book? When did you start to see the project in that way?
I would say, I guess just the frustrations maybe in 2017, and then. I'd written a few short articles that sort of were, that gave birth to the book, and sort of just really sort of intervening in the way that there was a lot of catch up to, so a few examples that happened around that time was that, Trump gets elected, and then all of a sudden saying open borders is too much, right? Then all of a sudden progressive parties in Europe saying, well, we can't really be pro-refugee anymore. That was nice for a few years, and now we have to stop that. And so at that point, that really is when the idea of wanting to write this book and really to intervene in that sort of that debate or those questions that were not just in, let's say, progressive circles, but in larger society as well. So that's when the book came about. But because of the PhD and 2 children, it was a much longer process.
I bet. That's even more admirable then. I'd like to open up the floor for questions from the folks here and or folks watching at home. Does anyone have any questions for our authors? Don't be shy. I know there's some questions out there. I'm not gonna let you off the hook. Okay, over there in the back.
Well, first of all, thanks to the 3 authors. Really looking forward to reading your work. Question for Chris. I was caught by, you mentioned that the AI is called David. Can you talk about how you came up with the name for
So the question is, the AI in Chris's book Valid is called David, and how did she come up with the name?
There's an official reason, sort of answer that is good for my career. Essentially, you know, it's a flip on the Bible. So that's one thing. The real reason is that it's the last name of my boss. And so I figured it'd be nice to turn him into an evil, you know, dictatorial robot. So
Real here, people.
there we go. He's not here, but I am meeting. I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning, first thing. So, you know, I had an interesting conversation with him about that. But I'd say also, I mean, regardless, you know, there's something. I think people who develop these sort of tech tools tend to go back to archetypes and tend to go back to these sort of like strong male archetypes, reassuring, you know, we're building a king of a system that will protect us and save us. And so they would, you know, probably name it something like this. You know, right now we've got acronyms, ChatGPT, sure, but eventually it'll have a name and it'll probably have some kind of, you know, it'll either be a Greek goddess or some kind of biblical character, probably, because of the ego on these people, right? Yeah.
Any more questions? I know there's some hands just twitching to be raised.
You talked about Amazon warehouse working. Could you talk about what migrant workers do in Dollarama?
Just to repeat the question for anyone watching at home, the question is, Mostafa talked about the Amazon warehouse, and could he talk at all about racialized immigrants or migrants working in Dollarama?
Okay, so I mean the work conditions in Dollarama. I mean it's so funny always talking about Dollarama. You always feel like you have to do this like explainer about Dollarama because like why is Dollarama important? I mean Dollarama is fundamentally very important, right? We all go to Dollarama. The family that runs it is like the 8th richest family in Montreal, 50th in Canada, partly owned by Mitt Romney. And now, yeah, it's a major corporation, and the warehouses here. I mean, for a lot of these, you know, they're mostly the people who work inside Dollarama are refugee claimants. So during the pandemic, and I talk about this in the book, they're all refugee claimants or refused refugee claimants, and a lot of them are the people who came over at Roxham Road, right? This was the joke inside Dollarama is like, there's, you know, the first 2 things you do when you arrive to Quebec is you put in your refugee claim and then you go work at Dollarama, right? It's always the second thing you do as a refugee. So, and I mean, the work inside Dollarama's warehouses is really brutal. And I worked there as well, right? I did a stint there in 2015, and I talk about the experiences there, and it really is kind of like out of a bad Charlie Chaplin movie where, you know, you're simply just moving hundreds of thousands of boxes in a dusty, you know, badly lit, overheated, giant warehouse with thousands of people in it together, right? And you see this thing. And when I worked there, one of the things that astonished me was that I thought everybody kind of worked 9 to 5, and I realized, and I always use this analogy, is that there's 2 rush hours in the city, right? There's 2. So there's one if you're mostly if you're white and you work in white collar work and you go downtown, and then for everybody else, you're on the metro at 6 a.m. When it first opened. You're actually waiting for the metro sometimes to open, and they're all black and brown, and everyone is just heading off to these hidden parts of the city, right? So Dollarama's warehouses are like by Metro de la Savane, and it literally is people just moving a giant box every 3 to 6 seconds, right? And you're doing that 8 hours a day, and you don't know whether you're going to have the job the next day, even if you've been there for 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years. And I talk about, and the way that people were pushed. When I was there, I remember it was the week before Christmas, and we had to move, I think it was like 2 million boxes, like big boxes, not small boxes. So the boxes that are above the aisles at Dollarama. And we did 2 million in a week. So all we do is take stuff that come off the train, rearrange it, put it back somewhere else. But they don't, so that's the experience. And they don't want to give people any decent, not make them permanent, not give them any decent wages or any conditions, but they make this company run. It is incredible to watch that. Simply the way you make money in this world is that you buy things as cheaply as possible from the global south. You get people to move things as cheaply and fastly as possible here in the global north. Right? That's the world we live in.
What were you working in? Research?
Amazon, yes. Dollarama. No, actually, I just come back, and then I actually needed a job very quickly. And then the irony was that even had been organizing around Dollarama, the agency sent me to Dollarama. So I was at first excited, and then I actually lost a lot of weight. And then I was equally excited, and then I wanted to write about it. But I was so exhausted, I couldn't even write about it. So I actually wrote like an anonymous blog, but then by the end I was just but by the end of the experience, I was like done. I was just, forget this.
What is the wage there?
Then it was minimum wage and or like 50 cents above minimum wage. And then we had been struggling during the pandemic, and now they actually, they have an okay wage, right? Like, some people make 22 to 24 an hour, and that's because we did demonstrations like every month for like 2 years at Dollarama. Yeah.
Yeah, good for you guys. I see a question from Rebecca.
Sean, I just finished your book. It was fun to go to the launch whenever that was, a month or 2 ago. I loved it. Could you talk a little bit about the process of forming the voice of this kind of like later stage female poet? I don't know, it felt so authentic and like well written. I was just, curious how do you get there?
So the question is about the protagonist, the 70-something female narrator, and how you came to form her voice. It's always hard to ask writers how they do things.
Yeah, I mean, my first two books. My first book is narrated by I guess how old is he? Anyway, like a middle-aged straight white guy, and my second book is written by the main character is a middle-aged straight white guy, cis white guy. So like can you notice a theme or a pattern? But both of those characters, the protagonists of both of those books, and the characters in both of those books are characters like I'm trying, and over the course of my time as a fiction writer from when I was writing my first stories to now. I'm trying to learn how to like represent people who are not me. I'm not the author who's just constantly trying to kind of manifest his own voice. I'm trying to represent an imaginary world as if it were real, and to use that kind of fiction, that lie, to somehow convey something about the real world. And I don't know why. I was reflecting recently about how I like never read nonfiction. Like I really don't much care for it. And even like literary nonfiction. I'm like, why do I want, like, why is the lie in it so important to me? I don't know. But it does something for me. But I'd written these two books, and I think, you know, I spent a lot of time working on that level of, on the craft or learning how to write people, but worrying about doing something else for fear of getting it wrong. There's the question of appropriation as well, but where I kind of end up standing on appropriation is if you write a character who is, like, if you write a character who badly, that they feel clunky and are stereotyped and caricatured, then people are going to be like, well, that's crummy, that's bad. And the closer they are to you, the more you can be like, no, that's how we really are, you know? But the farther they are from the author's identity, the less ground you have to stand on, and so the harder you have to work to try to be represent that truthfully, whether that's research, reading diverse voices, working with sensitivity readers, experts, talking to friends, all of these things, talking to family. And so with this book, I kind of saw it. I think it was my partner who said to me, you should, like, all these books about dudes, like, you should write a book about a woman. And I was like, I don't know, but like, can I? Like, partly, like, am I entitled to, and partly, could I? And I kind of realized that I think one is entitled to make art about whatever one wants. One can just, like, fuck it up. So I decided to try. Whether I could, I didn't know. And so writing an older person is a challenge. Writing someone whose gender doesn't align with my own is a challenge, but so is, like, writing a poet felt like a challenge. Like, I'm not a poet, and suddenly I felt like a pretender. Writing about an imaginary near future, you know, everything is kind of like, if you're a fiction writer, you're basically just making everything up. So it's all hard, but you just have to try to, like, really, I mean, I feel like it's an artist, like a visual artist who's really trying to get the face to look like the face they want it to look like, and it's a combination of practice and craft. But I'm glad it worked out. Okay.
We've got time for another question or two. Does anyone have anything they want to ask? I'll ask another question to Chris. We have in common a shared background. You were with the Voir newspaper, and I was with the Mirror. Sometimes when I speak to some of our younger readers and colleagues, I realize that they don't even know what those things are. Yeah. They were weekly newspapers that ran for many, many years in Montreal.
Like 30 years almost, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like many of our former colleagues, we had
competing bars.
Yes.
We would hang out on different places on the Main, not talk to each other so much, and there was a strong competition between the Mirror and. I mean, we could
go on,
yes,
you know, for a while about that, but you know,
there's a book here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna file that one away. Anyway, like many of our former colleagues in that world, you work at is it an ad agency or
yeah, Cassette.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, first of all, how you had the time to write a book, and also what compelled you to write the book, given that you were already caught up in the ad work and the speaking work and all of the other projects that you do.
It kind of, and I think it's an interesting example of a publisher reaching out to perhaps unusual voices, because the talk came before the book. They're not connected, but there are elements in common. And my publisher randomly just showed up at one of these events, and she said, "You should write a book." At first, it was supposed to be an essay on the place of people that don't quite fit in society and in the workforce. I thought that that would be kind of a boring book for the reasons you said, right? Like there's no robot in it. And no, like I like to have a couple of killer robots in my book every time. And so then it turned into a piece of fiction because somebody at the office, by the way, which is really interesting, I had written some kind of memoir or just a little bit about my childhood. And then somebody said, oh, I can't wait to see what happens next. And I was like, oh yeah, what happens next? So I went all the way to 2050. So basically, it was a publisher who reached out and kind of taught me how to write, really coached me. We worked on a Google Drive. We met every 2 weeks. She was like, you suck, do it again. And I did it again and again until we got it right. And to answer your question about time, I don't know, man. I mean, I work, I write every night until from 8 to 10. Essentially, and I think if you just do your set amount of words, you have the right coach, which was my publisher, and you just get going. You just do it. Most writers have to work. Most writers, have to. All writers pretty much have a day job, right? So there's no. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you're that successful. Maybe you're getting there. No.
For now.
Yeah, but some people. So he can, but some writers. Yeah, but he's got talent. He's got talent, and I've got a work ethic. So that's a difference. Here, us. So the initial publisher in Quebec is XYZ. En français, in France, Philippe Ray, and in Canada and the US, Anansi, House of Anansi. And it's going to be turned into a movie featuring killer robots. Uh-huh.
Well, that's exciting. I can't wait to see it. I mean, it must, obviously it's not just me. When I saw the words dystopian autofiction, I was like, no brainer. I have to check that out.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad, but it's fun to do an object that just hasn't been around, right? So we'll see for what comes next, but at least this one's fun.
All right. Yeah. I'm going to give one last chance to anyone who wants to ask a question. Either here in the room or at home. Mary?
Okay, this one is for Mostafa. It's kind of an abstract question, but now that we're talking about robots and the workplace, I feel that you must have a lot to say according to concerning Amazon, because it's one of the North American biggest companies that takes in workers and keeps them in this state that also Marx described of the group of workers that have to be available for capitalism to work, but they also can't have a stable job. So how is this coming in?
Also my client, by the way.
I'm not sure if I can quickly summarize that question for the folks at home, but it's something to do with how Amazon works with migrant workers and disposable workers and robots. Where do the robots fit in?
So robots do fit. I mean, automation and Amazon is a really, I'll have my own going off on a tangent at the end of this, but so robots, so right now for a lot of these kind of jobs that I talk about in the book, so whether you think about care work or whether you think about, warehouses like Dollarama, not Amazon, I'll get to Amazon, but, whether you think about food processing and all these things, it's really funny because we think about, the big fear about robots and automation and AI is there's just going to be no jobs and it's going to look like Elysium. And then there's just going to be millions of unemployed people just scavenging the earth. But actually, robots are really expensive, right? And a lot of these jobs, it's unfortunate. It's people like us who write or who create or who manage offices, and we're the ones who are going to lose our jobs. These people actually won't, because it's actually really complicated to get a robot to put a bunch of different sized boxes together in a bag. So it's actually, they've studied it, and it's really expensive. And for now, right? Or picking fruit, it's really expensive to get a robot to do it, right? So in the logic of the system, it's just cheaper to have humans that you pay really cheaply to do that work. But what makes Amazon unique is Amazon is like, we can actually use technology to make this more efficient, not to replace people, right? So there's a long-standing debate and whether robots are just going to throw us out, on the street. But really, I think robots get used to make us work harder, to work faster, to really monitor us. And so Amazon, it's done really creepy. It's like Black Mirror, right? And so when I work there, I'll give you an example. So Amazon outfits all of its warehouses with artificial intelligence cameras, right? So everyone cries like to the moon about China, Big Brother, AI, facial recognition. You have 1 million people in the US who do this 10 hours a day who are surveyed under artificial intelligence cameras, right? And so the way the AI cameras work, and it's so funny because even your supervisor will be like, look, you got to talk to someone. The cameras follow you. So you got to duck behind aisle whatever, E27, hang a left, you'll dodge the other camera, and you can meet the person you want to talk to there, right? And I remember going to work one day, and then they're like, we got to talk to you. I was like, okay, what did I do wrong? I thought I did pretty good yesterday. And then it's like, well, actually, the cameras are giving you a warning. I mean, what do you mean the cameras are giving me a warning? The cameras said you didn't follow the 2-meter rule yesterday. And so it's amazing because you can't it came up in the discussions. Technology is not neutral. It's not this like benign thing, right? And so all of a sudden these supervisors, well, it's not me. I'm not being biased. It's the cameras. And how can the cameras be wrong, right? You screwed up. Now you're in trouble. And I was thinking about it, I was like, this wouldn't be tolerated in any other context, right? So to be followed by a bunch of artificial intelligence cameras that generate a report every 6 minutes on what you do, aggregate it, and then give it to your supervisors. If that were happening to you in school, you would freak out. Or in your actual workplace, you would just kind of lose it. So, I mean, the AI cameras, and not a lot of people complain. I was like kind of shocked. And then, in other ways that Amazon uses technology, there's this, their obsession of metrics, right, is really about trying to figure out how to make people go faster or to eventually introduce robots. So, when you go in there, you're like the board. You got like your red finger scanner on one hand, and then you got it's like a megaphone on your other arm, and you don't know what you're doing. You literally just have to look at the screen every 6 seconds and be like, move the next box there, and if you get it wrong, then the whole thing goes red, and then you got to do it again, and then you get red twice, and then all of a sudden some guy appears in the middle of nowhere being like, and then you're like, and so the whole thing is extremely stressful, but the idea is to put an immense amount of pressure. They follow you, someone is following you from Seattle, and you're all the way in Laval, for God's sakes, right? But the point is that they don't actually want to replace people. They just want to make people more productive. And that's the way technology gets introduced. And Amazon did introduce they're trying it out, their first humanoid robot in a warehouse. So there are a whole bunch of robots in Amazon warehouses, like the Kiva, like it's a yellow stacking thing that just kind of rolls around and it brings you the things, right? And then you gotta get them off the shelf. And in the US, there's a whole genre, a subculture of Amazon workers. It's kind of like Fight Club with their robots. And so there's a whole TikTok videos where you can watch Amazon workers trying to like program their robots to fight each other. And actually in one instance, someone sent a video to a Facebook group I was part of where someone got trapped by their robots. Like the robots literally encircled this worker in a thing, and so it is quite dystopic. But the point is that I don't think Amazon is interested in full automation, right? And I think it really changes our debates about all kinds of things: universal basic income, whether we're going to be all unemployed, but it's really about the way technology is used to really just survey you, put pressure on people, and at the end of the day, have this benign control. The last thing is that, I recently was in a court case with an Amazon worker, and the evidence Amazon produced seemingly looked like a bunch of chatbots sending emails to each other because they were all the same email with a different name. But the chatbot A would send the same email that chatbot B just sent them, and in response sent another. And you're like, this isn't evidence. So the whole thing is really they have no HR. It's all completely automated. So those are the people who lost their jobs. But in the warehouse themselves, it's always expanding.
Pretend neutrality.
Yes, exactly.
It must be hard for science fiction writers to keep up. Well, Mostafa, Chris, Sean, thank you very much. Thank you so much. You've given us so much to think about. And all three of the books are for sale. The MRB is here for free. Thank you all so much for coming. And please have a drink, stick around, chat, get your books signed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. That was fun.